My name is Brian O'Shaughnessy, and I would love to talk with you about rural and migrant ministry. The first thing I want to say is thank you to the Presbyterians for their very generous support of RMM, as we call it, throughout many, many, many years. RMM goes back a long, long way. It actually has its roots in the 60s and 70s, and it was in about 1970 that a number of congregations, UCC and others with the Presbyterians, under the New York State Council of Churches, formed a covenant. And the covenant was to minister for social transformation in rural New York. And it flowed out of the work of Presbyterians, especially in the lower Hudson Valley. And then in next year, 2021, is RMM's 40th anniversary as a nonprofit organization. So it has that anniversary, and also it's like 60 years of this work in rural New York. And we're very proud of RMM. We think it does some absolutely terrific work. Last year, we had the joy of celebrating passage of a farm worker bill that ended many, many years of racist exclusions of farm workers from worker rights that almost all other workers enjoy. But the purpose of RMM, besides the farm worker campaign, which it coordinated, is to educate, to empower, to accompany, and to advocate. And advocating, again, made a huge difference in the passage of this farm worker bill. And let me talk a little bit about the education, which is for us empowerment. RMM has the main office is in Poughkeepsie, but because of its focus on rural advocacy and rural social transformation, it has one center in Sullivan County, in Liberty. It has another center in Lyons out in Wayne County, again, because of the number of farm workers out there. And it has a center on Long Island out in Riverhead. Again, there's thousands of farm workers who work in the different agriculture out on Long Island, the wine industry, the landscaping industry, and so on. So these are the centers where we focus on accompanying farm workers on their journey, because we don't lead, they lead. It is very critical to RMM that the farm workers and the rural workers are the leaders in their social change. Let me go back a bit and talk about the two feet of social change. Perhaps you've heard this many times. One foot is charity, and one foot is justice. And RMM is almost fully in the footprint of justice. We do not run soup kitchens. We celebrate those who do. We do not do the direct service. We do advocacy and social change. And often that means a much longer campaign or a much longer effort. And the metrics of RMM, as we often say, are really different than those of many organizations. We can't say we feed 10,000 people, a year, but we can talk about the success of our educational efforts, and that is through mainly the three centers And I'd like to talk a little bit about them now. The center in Sullivan County, which includes areas like Monticello, has started as, we call it the Youth Economic Group, because the young people down there decided they wanted to try to start a business. And not just a business, but a cooperative business. And they had help from a professor at Siena, and they have indeed done that amazingly successfully. So they meet every week, which of course has changed during the pandemic, but they still meet virtually. But when they can, they meet, and they produce bags for justice. In other words, they silkscreen bags and shirts, which they sell. And it's an amazing transformation in these young people to be part of something like this. They've learned a tremendous amount about business. They've learned a tremendous amount about themselves. They've learned a tremendous amount about the community. And it's a great success. That's about 10, but it's limited. Just doing this kind of work, and the transportation is a major issue for rural and migrant ministry. It takes well over an hour for the coordinator down there to go transport the youth to a meeting, and then at the end of it, to transport them back, returning home. So transportation is always a challenge for rural and migrant ministry. But we've been doing it, and very successfully. So that is the one group, the Youth Economic Group. There is another group out in Western New York called JOY, which is Youth Organizing for Justice. And that accompanies a lot of the effort out there in terms of accompaniment and working directly with the farm workers. But so RMM has had a strong youth focus. And the third area is on Long Island, and they're beginning, they have a youth focus there. But I want to go back to what, in a sense, has inspired our work with youth, and that is the summer leadership camp. I have had the joy of experiencing this in person many times over the past. I've been worked with RMM for probably 20 years. And it's an amazing experience. It began because farm worker parents had no resources, none at all, to send their kids to camp. Summer camp is expensive, and they did not have the resources. So we felt that this was an important service we could give them, but again, it's not encouraging them to only serve, but to transform their lives and that of the larger communities, rural New York. So during this week, it's an overnight camp. By the way, it has been most recently at Holmes Presbyterian Camp. And it's an overnight camp where the youth experience art. So RMM pays professionals to come in and lead sessions every day in art, in music, in drama, and then there's also, of course, recreation, and it's a phenomenal experience. And then there's also a liturgy. So our executive director is Reverend Richard Witt, who will have his 30th anniversary next year, along with RMM's 40th. And he initiated this liturgy in the evening, but basically it's a big campfire. So they set up chairs or some kind of seating, sometimes on wooden blocks, around a big campfire, and they have a good old campfire meeting. And it's an amazing experience. I've been there many times. And often after Richard speaks and some of the youth speak, they open it for anyone to speak. And some of the things that the youth say are so powerful. They can talk about their parent who has been deported. They can talk about someone in their family who has died. And they're willing to do this because they trust one another and they trust RMM's leadership, and especially Reverend Witt, an amazing leader himself. And it's been a very moving experience anytime I've been able to be there, especially for the liturgy. But that's about 80 to 100 youth each encampment, 80 to 100 youth. And of course, it did not take place this year in person, but it did take place virtually with the amazing work of people who can do these things virtually. And I'm not one of them. So that camp has empowered many of these youth to want to give back. And maybe I could mention one story about that. I was down there, and one of the counselors I just started talking with, and I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Las Vegas." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes, I work in a restaurant in Las Vegas." And I said, "What brings you here?" He said, "Well, my experience of camp was so great, I want to give back." And I thought, there's an example. He takes his vacation week, pays his way to come to camp, and is a counselor for the week. And that's his way of giving back. So if RMM has done nothing else, if we can empower young people to give back for social justice, for the greater good, for other human beings because they love them, then it will have been successful. So the program on Long Island has taken off. Many, I mentioned farm workers on Long Island, often in places that you don't see, going to the Hamptons, of course. But there's a real community out there, and they are working very hard in things like, for example, landscaping. These farm workers are not migrant farm workers. They live there. They live there with their families. And during the winter, the farm workers are still engaged and employed. And for example, in landscaping, there's houses going up, there's housing developments going up all over the place down there in Suffolk County. And they all involve eventually landscaping. They also spend a large part of the winter planting seeds for the crops that will also be growing starting in the spring. And a couple of the farm workers have described to me what hard work that is. They are bent over and have to plant these seeds, and they do it for 10 hours a day. Very hard work. It's very demanding and takes real skill. And those are some of the things our farm workers have, which is real skill. They are not unskilled workers. So that's part of what goes on Long Island. They have also started now a youth group. And then the third one is out in Lyons in Western New York. And that youth group is called Joy. Youth Organizing for Justice. And they're doing amazing work out there. They're also working directly with farm workers out there. And so all of that work has led to accompaniment. So I said RMM does education, It does empowerment. It does advocacy, and all about social transformation in rural New York. I want to go back, if I might, Nancy, is that okay?
Yes, I'm going to stop you for 1 minute.
Yeah.
I wanted to let the audience know, to introduce myself. I'm Nancy Pienta, a member of the Mission Committee, a member of the Valatia Presbyterian Church. I have spoken with Brian before about RMM, and his excitement about the programs is just so evident, as you saw. But the reason why we are doing this, and we're so happy to have you here, Brian, is that we would like to promote our mission partners. And in these resource videos that you will have available to you, we hope that you will learn more about these missions and support them. Our presbytery supports them, and some individual congregations also support you. So I just wanted to put this in a picture here of what we're doing. And please go on, Brian.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I want to go back to the Justice for Farmworker campaign because of our connections in Western New York and in the Hudson Valley and in other places throughout the state. Farm workers have said, what you can do for us, RMM, is to change the law so that we can be treated like all other workers. And so that started over 20 years ago, the Justice for Farm Worker campaign, which RMM was willing to coordinate. And it has many allies. It has unions. It has religious groups. It has many, many allies. And finally, last year, the Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act was passed and signed by the governor after it passed the Senate and the Assembly. So up until that point, farm workers, up until recently, did not have the legal right to water in the fields like all other workers do. They did not have the right to toilet facilities like all other workers do. They did not have the right even to a day of rest, which all other workers do. So they had gained them incrementally over the past 10 years. But the big one was ending the exclusions that started way back in the 1930s. And it's amazing to me, but this is an excellent example, I'm afraid, of institutionalized racism right here in New York State. And what I'm talking about is when the Fair Labor Practices Act was being debated in 1938, senators and Congress people from, I have to say, from the South, got up there and had no problem saying, and the farm workers were almost all Black in the South, saying you cannot treat the Black person the same way you treat the white person. This is all in the congressional record. It's still shocking to me. And in order to get the Fair Labor Practices Act passed nationally, the compromise was that farm workers would be excluded. And they were excluded for all of these decades until last year in New York State, when they gained equality under the law. There's a few differences in the law. They don't gain overtime until after 60 hours, for example, versus 40 hours, but they are guaranteed under the law now in New York a day of rest, and they are guaranteed the water and the toilet facilities, and so on and so forth. So it was a major, major victory. And we're still celebrating it, and we're still working to to make sure it's implemented throughout New York State, especially in our centers. Again, out in Western New York, near Rochester, down in the Hudson Valley, in Long Island, and in Sullivan County, in our Liberty Center.
Thank you, Brian. Your passion and your enthusiasm for your program is so evident. One thing I noticed that you're in the southern part of the state, and you're also in the western part of the state. You're in Hudson Valley. I live in Columbia County. There's Rensselaer County and Albany County. Is there any, do you have a presence in this area at this point? So that's the one question. And the other is for people who feel inspired to help out, maybe they can't do it money-wise. Are there other areas that they can volunteer or help you in your walk with the migrants and the rural people?
We really, the main presence and the main thing we have been asking for years and years is advocacy. And that is anyone in a congregation or not in a congregation was encouraged to help pass the farm worker bill. And in fact, they did. There was an event every year called Farm Worker Albany Day. And many, many Presbyterians, for example, participated in that year after year after year, and other events at the Capitol where we tried to make our presence known, standing behind the farm worker leaders. We did that, and we would be present in that kind of advocacy, also of letter writing to their elected officials. So that's one thing. There is no campaign right now. There is a lot of work to be done to implement the bill, but there is no campaign. So the possibility, because we're not a direct service organization, we are about transformative justice. And by the way, to answer your question, Nancy, there are not that many volunteer opportunities right now. Okay. In Columbia County or in Rensselaer County. However, not that long ago, RMM did hire a new coordinator for the Hudson Valley, the Catskills, and the Hudson Valley. And we hope that that person will come north and be a presence here in, I'd say, the capital region, which would, of course, include Columbia County. But that's on the horizon. That's the best I can say. There are things, one thing you had asked me very early on when we talked a while back about the challenges. And one of the challenges for RMM is transportation. It is a tremendous issue for RMM. Languages also can be, but all of our coordinators are bilingual for sure. And but transportation is so, we purchase vans. It takes a coordinator, for example, let me talk about the Youth Arts Group, which uses art to bring about social transformation. It's we use art at the camp, but also all year long, there is a program called the Youth Arts Group that uses art to empower young people. And again, and let me say this before I forget it, for the Youth Arts Program and the Youth Economic Group down in Liberty, 95% of the graduates go on to college. For those who fulfill the time commitment that is required of them, which is 10 hours a week, and other specified things, for those graduates, 95% go on to college. So we don't have, again, numbers in the thousands and thousands, even though we serve thousands and thousands of farm workers. But it's not, again, direct service. It is empowerment and education of the farm workers to be the leaders we know they can be and are in many places throughout the state.
Brian, thank you very much for telling us about your program. If you could lift up contact information. So this is for people who would like to learn more about your program, who they can contact and talk to. That would be wonderful. Thank you very much, Brian. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today and to make this video for us so we can share it and share your information.
Good. It's such a pleasure to be here. And again, we are so grateful to the Presbyterians in Albany and throughout the state, actually, for their support of RMM. Go in peace. Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you.